Over the last year, as I have been reporting on interest rates reaching the highest levels we've seen in over 20 years, the same question keeps recurring over and over again, which is how do we make homes more affordable? Not just for first time home buyers, but also for move up buyers who maybe have outgrown their current home and need a larger home for their family, or perhaps need to downsize, but they are reluctant to move because they don't want to leave their very low interest rate that they have. And so it's kind of caused the real estate system to be gridlocked. It's not that there isn't demand for homes, there is. And I've addressed that in my previous video about the housing demand driven largely by the millennial age buyers who are wanting to get into homes, but it's really there is a lack of inventory. So the question is, and the answer to how we address this temporary issue is something called a 2-1 buy down. It's what we can do while we wait for interest rates to come down. But that presupposes that interest rates are coming down. So what gives me the confidence to say that that's going to happen? Well, let's just take a look historically at how interest rates have moved. Here is a chart from the St. Louis Federal Reserve showing a history of the 30-year fixed mortgages going back over 50 years to 1971. And as we look at it, we can see it goes up and down, with the exception being here in the early 80s when the rates reached a peak. And from that point, we had a long, gradual decline in interest rates all the way to when rates hit their all-time lows in 2020. And then lately here, we see that the rates have spiked up. And maybe if we're a little bit fear-based, we think that, well, if the rates are on this trajectory, maybe they're just going to keep on going to where they were back in the early 80s. But the reason why I don't think that is a likely scenario is because these other gray shaded vertical lines represent periods of recession. And whenever we had recessions, or whenever we have recessions, we always get lower interest rates. So again, the rates go up and down all the time. And we're going to employ this strategy as we look at the 2-1 buy down with the belief, not just blind faith, but historical perspective that when rates go up, they also come down, especially in times of recession. And right now, there are a lot of different things in the economy that are pointing towards a recession, which would give us confidence to believe that rates are going to come down. Okay, so now that we've set the table as to why we believe that interest rates are going to come down, let's deal with the fact that we still have to deal with the current interest rates, which are high. And we're going to deal with that with a 2-1 buy down. What a 2-1 buy down means is that in the first year, the rate's 2% below the note rate. And in the second year, it's 1% below the note rate. And in the third year, it goes to the note rate. So what that means is the buyer, and it's actually not even the buyer, but rather the seller who's giving a credit to the buyer to buy down the rate temporarily for the first year at a rate that's 2% below the note rate and then 1% below the note rate in the second year. And what happens is with that credit, that money gets set aside and held with the lender so that when the buyer pays their rate that's 2% below the note rate, the lender takes the money that they've collected from the seller that's been held aside, and they use that to supplement the buyer's payment. So again, in the first year, the buyer's getting a rate that's 2% below the note rate, and in the second year, it's 1% below the note rate. And so what happens here is as we wait for interest rates to come down, as we think we have good reason to believe they will, this gives the buyer a lower rate that's more affordable in the meantime. And so if someone were to start this on December 1st of 2023, and we use a note rate of 7.875, they're going to have a rate that's 2% below that, 5.875, all the way through December of 2024. And so with the rates coming down, as we suspect they will, whether that's in the first quarter or the second quarter of 2024, whenever that happens, the buyer can then refinance into a 30-year fixed loan, okay, but still enjoy the benefits of having a lower rate in the meantime and getting all the other benefits of tax deduction and owning their own home and having a lower rate. So let's see how those numbers actually look on paper, or in this case, on screen. In this example, we're going to assume a purchase price of $900,000 with a 20% down payment, which means the borrower would have a $720,000 loan. Below that, we have the interest rates, which I'll come back to in just a moment, and the payment, which does include the estimated taxes and insurance. In addition to that, we have the cash to close, which includes not only the 20% down payment, but also the closing costs. So for starters, let's look at the first column on the left. It says 2-1 buy down note rate of 7.875. Now, let's just say the borrower was not going to do a buy down and not going to pay any points. As of the current rates today in November 9th or 10th, the rate's around 7.875% for no points. And consequently, they would have this total payment of about $61.58. But on a 2-1 buy down, what happens is instead of getting a rate of 7.875% for the first year, the buyer buys down the rate with a credit from the seller to 2% below to 5.875%. And what that does is take the payment down to $51.96 and basically reduces the payment by $961.43 for the first year. That's a very significant payment savings. And then what happens in the second year of the 2-1 buy down, the rate goes to just 1% below the note rate, which would be 6.875%. And then the payment goes to $56.67, which is still $490.61 below the note rate payment of $61.58. So you can see in the first 2 years, it's offering a very significant payment savings. But with this strategy of the 2-1 buy down, we don't expect the borrower to be in there for 2 years, even 1 year, because we think that the rates are going to come down and you'll be able to refinance into a lower fixed rate sometime likely within the next 12 months. Okay, so who and how exactly is this 2-1 buy down paid for? Remember, the cost of the 2-1 buy down is calculated by taking the difference in payment between the note rate, in this case 7.875%, and the bought down rate of 5.875% in year one. Take that payment difference and add it to the payment difference between the note rate of 7.875 and the bought down interest rate of 6.875% in year two. So this is what the numbers look like. So here we're going to summarize our cash to close, starting with the down payment itself, our 20% down payment of $180,000. The APR costs represent a certain amount of interest that would be due at closing. The non-APR costs I'm estimating are the title and escrow and lender fees. And then you also have the prepaids, which would be 6 months worth of taxes and 12 months worth of insurance that would be set aside. But the buy down costs here are the difference between the note rate and the lower rates in the first 2 years. So basically, when the buyer pays a rate of 5.875% in year one and 6.875% in year two, it's saving them $21,600 over that 2-year period to have that temporarily bought down rate. And so there's a cost to get that temporarily bought down rate. And so how is that paid without having to come out of the borrower's pocket? Well, it's paid for with a contribution from the seller. So in other words, the seller is giving a credit to the buyer to cover the cost of the bought down rate so that it doesn't add to their total cash to close. So that you can see in this scenario with 20% down, the total cash to close in all three of these is right around $194,000. So you may be asking yourself right now, if the home is worth $900,000, what makes you think that the seller is going to give a $21,600 credit to the buyer so that they can get a lower interest rate? Well, that's a good question, but it is based on if. If it is in fact worth $900,000, then we may need to work around that. But assuming the home isn't already overpriced, there is a way to negotiate this credit into the purchase price. But let's just say, for argument's sake, that all parties agree the value of the home truly is $900,000. Well, in that case, what the buyer can do is increase their offer by the cost of the seller buy down, $21,600. So instead of offering the seller $900,000, they're going to offer $921,600 and request a credit back from the seller for $21,600. So the seller still nets the same amount as if they were selling the home for $900,000 with no concession. So this is how that would look. So now what we've done is we have rolled the cost of the 2-1 buy down into the purchase price. So instead of a purchase price of $900,000 even, we're going to call it $921,600. And consequently, if we're going to put 20% down, that means the loan amount is going to be a little bit larger, now $737,280, and the down payment is going to be a little bit larger too. But we're comparing here the two scenarios at the 5.875% interest rate. And we see that even though we've increased the purchase price slightly, the payment is still $836 a month less than if we had done no buy down. Not quite as much of a discount at the $961 payment difference, but still very significant. And if we take a look at how the cash to close works, it would look like this. Since we increased the purchase price to $921,600, that means our down payment is going to be a little bit larger too, because we're going to be doing 20% of $921,600 as opposed to $900 even. Therefore, the down payment is increased by about $4,300. But when we come down to the points, notice actually that it is $22,118 as opposed to $21,600. And again, it's because the loan amount's a little bit higher, and so it didn't work out quite exactly to $21,600. But still, what we would do is just request a credit from about $22,118 from the seller, and then you see the total cash to close is about $198. Again, the additional $4,000 comes from the slightly larger down payment due to the slightly higher purchase price, but likely well worth it to get that payment savings of $861 over the first year. And that is how the 2-1 buy down works. So to summarize, what we're doing is using a temporary rate buy down credited by the seller to give the borrower a lower interest rate and a more affordable payment. So what this does is accomplish three things. One, it lets the buyer get into a home now as opposed to waiting for the rates to come down and start building equity in the home. Two, it gets the buyer the ability to start having a tax write-off in the form of writing off the property taxes as well as interest on the loan. And three, perhaps most importantly, it allows the borrower to buy a home now before the rates come down, because when the rates come down, there will be a flood of other buyers coming back into the market who are excited about lower interest rates, which will in turn push home prices up even further and making it even more difficult. So this gets him into the home now. And if you have questions about this, any further questions, or would like to see a specific scenario for you, reach out to me, message me, and I would be happy to put that together. Thanks.